Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And good morning for Miss Leena El-Ali, because we have such a different area. And first of all, I would like to thank for Professor Komaruddin, Komaruddin Hidayat, or Caknurian Urban Sufism, for inviting us to discuss about very wonderful discussion of the book. And thank you also for Leena El-Ali for your interesting book. And today we would like to open our discussion by saying the Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Maybe Pak Adi, first of all, we invite Prof. Kamar to give a speech or directly to Ibu Elena.
Let me take a few minutes.
Yes,
Well, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam.
First of all, I would like to extend my grateful and welcome to Sister Leena. You are most welcome to our forum, and also to all our colleagues and our guests. The topic tonight is not my academic background. Therefore, I would love to be a good listener tonight. And it is very timely issues, since the question, the challenge, the opportunity about the position, the role of and the relation between men and women about gender issues, quite like burning issues in Indonesia. Of course, everyone has experiences, and tonight we have an expert. Sometimes I was struck by, well, small thing whenever I attend the, well, like wedding ceremony. Say after akad nikah, then the Mr. of ceremony, or maybe what to say? Yes, the MC then asked the new wife to kiss the hand of her husband, but unfortunately, the Mr. ceremony never asked the husband to kiss her hand, the hand of his new wife. You know, it is, for me, it's interesting and significant event. It is indicating that some people still look at women is subordinate to husband, and it is only women that should kiss the hand of her husband. Meanwhile, and actually, it is actually the hand of wife that has, well, many things to do to serve her husband. It is supposed that the husband should kiss the hand of his wife, or at least vice versa, should be equal. Many times, always I witness that it is the wife that should serve the husband. In the Al-Quran, for example, there is a key word for me that it is said that antum libasul lahun wa hunna libasul lakum. That the relationship between husband and wife symbolized just like libas. What is libason? Like dress? What?
Dress, yeah.
Dress.
Yeah.
what is the function of dress? One, that it is to make someone looks to be more beautiful, aesthetical. So the husband and wife, the way they relate to each other, they behave with each other, should be kurota ayun, beautiful. And yes, that is why this book is interesting. There is no truth without beauty. It is encouraging, and I'm sure that the parent, the family will feel happy while looking at them so harmonious life, just like antum libasulahun wa hunna libasulakum. This is the first function of the dress. And second, someone wearing dresses to protect for the sake of healthy, to be healthy life. Meaning that the first medical doctor, the first doctor for the husband is his wife, and vice versa. The first doctor of wife is the husband. How to regulate, how to conduct, how to create the rhythm of life, daily life. I think it is in such a way that should give the well and create healthy life. And that's why, for example, the people that still single and after getting married, so far as I know, that it's getting better, they healthy, getting better because they live more regularly and more healthy. And the third one, the role of a dress, one is for the sake of beauty, second to get a healthy life. And the third, I think that the function of dress is to cover the aurah, meaning that it is actually quite indecent and it is very, very unpolite if there is a quarrel, dispute between husband and wife, then it is became the resource for the television, for newspaper, then it's became like the material for the viral in television and so on, because it is the thing that's happening in Indonesia, especially for the couple among the, well, celebrities. Whenever there is a problem, a small problem, but it became big and bigger whenever it is became for the newsman, newspaper became gossip. So the family of celebrities has become the resourceful material for the gossiping, which is done by newspaper and so on and so on. At least it is the three main function of libas. The relationship between husband and wife should be in such a way that in Al-Quran there is equal. Antum libasulahun wa hunna libasulakum. Well, I think I should stop here because I'm not expert in this issue, and we have here those my dear friend are expert in this issue, and I'm sure that the audience, the follower, are already waiting for you sharing your wisdom concerning this issue. I should stop here. Thank you very much. I would be a good listener for your speech tonight, especially for Leena. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Kamar, for introducing about gender relation in Islam. And Prof. For Leena, I forgot to introduce you because he is a well-known person in Indonesia, but I have to mention a bit about Professor Dr. Komaruddin Hidayat is a rector for International Islamic University of Indonesia, and he has been twice being a rector for State Islamic University of Sharif Hidayatullah during the period of 2006 until 2010 and 2010 to 2015. He is a columnist for and prolific book writer. His last book is Imagination Islam, a Reconstruction of Future Islam, published 2020. Thank you for your introductory comment, Prof. Kamar, and he highlighted that Islam actually teaching about equal relationship between, especially between husband and wife, or what we call equal between in the domestic realm. And now maybe we move on a book discussion on Truth Without Beauty, Good and the Quran and Women's Rights, authored by Leena El-Ali. Leena El-Ali, maybe I can introduce her for a while the others distinguished speakers is also Prof. Nina Nurmila. Leena El-Ali, who is a Lebanese British American citizen and spoken very much of Arabic, English, French, and Spanish. He is the founder and managing member of Bona Smart LLC, providing advisory and consulting service in international affairs, development, and investment. In a career spanning over 30 years, she was previously fund manager, investment banker, and social entrepreneur. Her company motto is Smart Solution for Good Ideas. The author of the book, No Truth Without Beauty, Good and the Quran and Women's Rights, published in 2021, acknowledged is inspired by her 15 years experiences of working in a peace building programs in different countries. This book has been widely endorsed by experts and scholars around the world and welcomed by the international development and diplomatic world. This ebook is free. So if hard copy is available for subsidized prices. So if you would like to cover, we can maybe contact Mas Adi. Okay, Leena is a strategist thinker who has worked with a number of international and non-profit organizations across South and Southeast Asia, in the Middle East and North Africa for several areas with the scope of conflict mitigation, governance, and peace building, Islam and democracy, human rights, and women's rights. From 2005 and 2012, she was also an editor-in-chief and publisher of the Common Grounds News Service. Okay, Miss Elena, before we invite you for give your speech or for describe your book, you have written valuable insights with respect to Islam, particularly referred to mostly the Quran and several hadiths. You acknowledge, even me and other progressive Muslim women, that women in the quotation mark women's agency during the revelation was honored, then disappear for political agenda, which is patriarchy, and eventually appear to regain women's agency again. There are several concerns that likely to put women in the secondary compared to male counterpart, or even dehumanize women. This is my word. As they refer to Quranic verses and alleged hadiths, such as women's creation, you describe as women nature, women's as a fitna, or in my own words, women as instigator of violence or wrongdoings, inheritance, witness, marriage, polygamy, and so on. So the question is how to challenge patriarchal conspiracies to convince that Islam is equally treated for those concerned. As Prof. Kamar mentioned just now, one example of how equal relationship between husband and wife, while in implementing in our society, especially in the Muslim world, that women is a secondary from their own husband. So the question also so the question how to challenge the patriarchal conspiracy to convince that Islam is equally treated to those concerned, or should we apply similar strategies in understanding this Islamic text globally? So we would like to invite Ms. Leena to deliver about their excellence book. Then we follow by Prof. Nina. Yes, we invite Ibu Leena, that's Indonesian name. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate this kind introduction, and I'm really honored to meet you, Professor Aisyah, Professor Nina, Professor Komaruddin. I'm really honored that I am in your company today, and delighted to see that we are joined by a number of other people. Maybe before I answer your question about how to challenge the patriarchy, is the volume okay? Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, yes.
Maybe I should tell you a little bit about why I wrote the book and how I came to write the book. The truth is, I was never focused in general in my life and in my work on gender issues. I was always focused on building bridges between communities, societies, countries. It was really that I was working on, that I was interested in. It's not that I wasn't interested in women's issues. Of course I was interested, but it wasn't my focus. It was really more about how to, bring conflicting parties together. So I was in general thinking more about things like diversity, pluralism, and how, societies from different backgrounds, religious and otherwise, can come together and find common ground and cooperate constructively to contribute good to this world. What happened is that along the way, during my work, I would come across, inevitably, I would meet a lot of people. And as you get to know people, you talk, you open up, they open up, and you discuss many things. So I started to hear a lot of very strange stories regarding women, often from women also, not just from men. And these strange stories or allegations, they would tell me are from the Quran, or they would tell me the Prophet said so. And the more I traveled, the more I met people from different places, I would hear more and more strange stories. And sometimes I would hear different versions of the same story. But generally, the ones that related to women were far more in number than the strange stories that I was hearing about other things. For example, they were more in number than the strange stories I was hearing about other religions, to give you an example. And one particular incident that stayed in my mind was one time when I was in Sri Lanka. I was talking to a group of Muslim women from Sri Lanka. As you know, probably about 10% of Sri Lanka is Muslim. And during this conversation that we were having, it was about human rights and the Quran's respect for human rights and things like that, and women and everybody, all human beings. This young lady put up her hand and she told me, but God told the Prophet Ayub, Nabi Ayub, to hit his wife. And I said, excuse me? She said, God told the Prophet Job to hit his wife, Nabi Ayub. I was stunned when I heard that, because I have been reading the Quran all of my life. And at that point in time, I must have read it thoroughly, conscientiously, in a studious way, at least 20, 25 times. And everyone else in the room, the other women, were nodding in agreement with her. Yes, yes, in the Quran. so, you know, that really took me by surprise. And I told them, look, I've read the Quran, I don't know how many times, and I do not recall something like this. And I think I would remember, because these days we're all reading the Quran, and unfortunately, because of all the horrible things we hear, we're actually looking for the horrible things. Astaghfirullah. You know, that's the situation, unfortunately, that we are in. So I told them, look, I truly, truly do not recall anything like this, and I would be very surprised, but let me go and look into it for you. So I went, when I came back home, I started to look into this issue. I went, of course, to the Arabic Quran, because, you know, I'm an Arabic speaker and I mostly read it in Arabic, even though in my studies, I would read the English side by side with the Arabic to kind of, you know, become conversant when I'm discussing with other people, usually in English as well as in Arabic. And what I realized is that some translations, there is you know, in a section of the Quran where Job is mentioned, and there is a mention of him grabbing like some like a branch or some grass or something, and God says, strike with it, meaning strike at the temptations of the devil and stay steadfast and strong and don't lose your faith in God no matter what happens. And it's so obvious that that's the meaning. Some translations have added, after the word strike, brackets, her. And then they put a footnote. And the footnote says, God is telling Ayub to hit his wife, because she's telling him, aren't you fed up with all this trouble, this God of yours who is sending you all these difficulties, all these ordeals? Why do you still believe in, you know? So this made me realize that some of the problem that we face in these misunderstandings of our beautiful religion, perhaps some of them are also coming from translations. So there's custom and patriarchy, and that's the big one. But there are also things that are happening because of some strange translations. So little by little, I started to realize that translations were a problem. But also, even though my interest was always more good relations between communities of different backgrounds, religious, ethnic, racial, etc., I realized something, which is that, you know, before we address our relations with our neighbors and try to make our relations with other communities better, we need to look at our relations within our own home. We need to look at relations with our own sisters, daughters, wives, mothers, and so on. And that's why when I did finally write something, I wrote about women, because we have to, you know, it's a little bit like, you know, you have to try to heal yourself before you try to heal others in a way, so that you are strong enough and you're coming from a legitimate place when you, and you're better equipped when you try to heal others, right? So this is why I realized that the question of women in Islam, and specifically in Quran, because there is a difference between Quran and Islam. And this is something I hadn't really understood before, because in my mind, as all of us who are born in this religion, we love our religion and we think of it as perfect. But really, you know, Islam is how things developed over time. The only thing that we have that is immutable for us as a community really is the Quran. That is the direct word. As we believe, and as the historical experts on these things from an archaeological perspective, if you like, if I can use that word, have confirmed, this is as we were given it by the Prophet at the time. And it is the direct word of God. But a lot of things happened that we think are, you know, rooted in in stone or fixed in stone. We think they happened during the Prophet's life. They actually happened over the next 200 to 300 years. And there is a difference there, because then our agency, which is legitimate, human agency is absolutely legitimate. But we also, if human agency was legitimate 200 and 300 years after the Prophet, then human agency is legitimate now also. Because in the same way that they were trying to do their best at the time for the societies that they were living in, we have a right and actually a duty to do our best for the societies and conditions and challenges that we meet today, which are not identical to the ones that were prevalent back then. So, so this is why I wrote the book. This was my motive, and the reason I focus so much on beauty is because, you know, we all know, those of us who love this faith, that we love it, and we feel very warm when we think about it, and we get very upset when we hear bad things about it. And one of the things that we haven't really grappled with is that, you know, if there is ugliness out there about our religion that is upsetting us and that is making our lives unpleasant, you can only fight ugliness with beauty. You cannot fight ugliness with force. You cannot fight it with violence. You cannot fight it with confrontational approaches. So yes, we need to challenge the patriarchy, to come back to your question. But I would suggest that rather than challenge the patriarchy in a direct way, let's try and do it in a way so that we're coming from a place of love and belief in the beauty of this religion. Because if we put the beauty back into the religion for everybody, we have a greater chance on shifting mindsets. Whereas if we go out and we try to, you know, challenge directly the patriarchy, you know, nobody who is in power in general is willing to relinquish power. And a challenge to anybody's position of power and privilege is always met with a pushback. It's human nature. Whereas I think we need to kind of reframe the whole thing so that we really are on the same team. And whether we're men or women in this religion, we are on the same team, whereby our mission has to be first and foremost to put the beauty back in. And when another way of looking at it is to put the soul back into this religion, because unfortunately, one of the things that has happened, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, is that in the same way that 200-300 years after the Prophet's passing, the scholars and the jurists, they tried so hard to legislate everything. They seem to have wanted to regulate, to have a rule and regulation book, manual for everything. But in doing so, you strip a religion of its spirituality, because a religion is not a how-to book. It's not a manual, an instruction manual. There are instructions, of course, for some things, but a religion is first and foremost about its spirituality. With its spirituality come do's and don'ts and instructions, but the heart of it is the spirituality. Unfortunately, what has happened with this move, and which we're still grappling with today, to regulate everything, to legislate everything, to turn this book that is intended to nourish our souls and lift our spirits, this bid to turn it into like a legal book, you know, a set of rules. This has gradually stripped it of its spirituality, and it's taken the soul. It's like you're having a body without a soul. The body might still function, it might still be physically healthy, but is it healthy inside? And the premise and the the heart and the mind that I brought into the process of writing the book really stems from this approach that I feel is the only way to really have a chance at changing the mindset of our societies in general in a constructive way. Now, in terms, I want to just say, if I can have a couple of more minutes about how the book is structured so that it can help those on the call who may not have had a chance to look at it yet. The book, in the same way that the book, I make a distinction between Quran and Islam, Islam being the historical effort that we have collectively made as a society, where in Quran being the direct word of God that the Prophet bequeathed us. I also wanted to therefore inevitably also, articulate where hadith comes in. Because hadith is that effort, the result of that effort 200 to 300 years after the. So it has its place, its legitimate place in our lives. A lot of the beautiful, wonderful guidance that we get comes from hadith. But there are things in hadith that are not compatible with the Quran. And this is something we have traditionally not understood, because traditionally a lot of us don't grow up with a proper religious education. We are left to our own devices. And by being left to our own devices, our sort of family and societal settings are, well-meaning. And we say, oh, well, they're all perfect and they're all good. But the truth turns out to be that, unfortunately, hadith is a vast, vast, vast collection of body of work. And we have, Professor Nina, I believe, who is an expert on this, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a vast amount of information in there. And we have to be very honest about what matches what the Quran says in message and guidance and spirit, and what doesn't. So the first part of the book tries to give an overview of how hadith was put together, what it contains, its incredible strengths and benefits, but also its weaknesses and its shortcomings, some of its methodological shortcomings as they grappled with this humongous task at the time. And then after that first part, it deals with that to set the foundation, to say, now that we understand this, we're not going to throw it out. We just need to understand that it's advantages and disadvantages. Now let's turn our attention to the Quran, which is the one thing we all agree on is non-negotiable if we are Muslim. And then I combed through the whole of the Quran and I found there were 17 topics that should be addressed. And so in the rest of the book, once part 1 on hadith is covered, in the rest of the book, I devote one chapter to each of those 17 topics in a way that is standalone. So every chapter is fully self-contained. So if you are interested in what the Quran has to say on divorce, you go to the divorce chapter. If you are interested in what it has to say on inheritance, you go to the inheritance chapter. If you are interested in what the Quran has to say about the nature of women, how as God created them, you go to that chapter. So it's organized in a way to make it as user-friendly as possible, both for a believer and for people from the outside. And I specifically wrote it so that somebody who is not from our religion, who is not born in the faith, like most of us, I think, on this call are, would also be able to benefit from it. So I try to simplify the language as much as possible and present the information in a way, in as user-friendly a way as possible. And that's why at the end of every sort of section, which is like part, the 17 topics are also grouped in a certain way. I try to provide summaries so that if you have to go back and look something up, you have all the references there, and the brief argument is re-summarized to make this as user-friendly as possible, because I recognize that it's a subject and there's so much there, and I try to make it as user-friendly as possible. So that's how why I wrote the book. That's how I think the best way forward is in terms of trying to change the structure for the seeker. Thank you. I'll stop there to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Leena. Thank you very much for your insightful explanation of being how to mismatch, or we call it intertextual understanding between Al-Quran and Hadith relate to the positioning women in equal ways. Before handing to the discussion, we invite the second speakers. Maybe she is Prof. Nina Nurmila. Hang on a second. Okay, from Nina Nurmila, she will maybe describe what she has been read about your book or whatever related to women in Islam, because she is also expert in gender in Islam. Prof. Nina Nurmila, PhD, is currently a Dean of Faculty of Education in the International Islamic University of Indonesia. She graduated from Faculty of Education, State Islamic Institute, Sunan Gunung Jati, Bandung. She holds a master's degree in Women's and Development Studies from Mudah University, Australia, and then completed her PhD in Islamic Studies and Gender from University of Melbourne, Australia. Sorry. From 2015 until 2019, Prof. Nina served as a commissioner of Komnas Perempuan. In 2017, she was appointed as a professor of fiqh with inaugural speech entitled Contemporary Fiqh with the Perspective of Gender Justice. One of her excellent books entitled Islam and Everyday Life, Renegotiating Polygamy in Indonesia, was published in Routledge 2009 and 2011. Yes, we invite Prof. Nina to deliver his speech considering about gender in Islam and relate to Leena's book. Yes, please, Prof. Nina.
Thank you very much, Kak Ica, Professor Siti Aisyah Kara, the moderator for your generous introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable Professor Dr. Komaruddin Hidayat, the host of this forum, Caknurian Urban Sufism, my rector at the Indonesian International Islamic University, and Leena El-Ali, the writer of the book, The Truth Without Beauty, God, the Quran and Women's Rights, who have, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to meet you here in Zoom. And also I would like to thank Adi, Pradana Adi Mukti, who has invited me to this forum. And I acknowledge that many friends also present in this forum. Also, I send the invitation to some of my students, both at the IIU, or Indonesian International University, or at the State Islamic University in Bandung that I cannot mention one by one. It's a great honor for me to be here discussing the book. Let me share my PowerPoint. Okay, so okay, here is the outline of my presentation. I would start with my positionality, as you also have explained why you wrote this book, and then my journey to be a Muslim feminist, and then I would like to respond to the book, and also I have some suggestion both for the writer and for the readers. Okay, let me start with my positionality. So before I read this book, I have read the works of Aziza Al-Hibri, Rifat Hassan, Asgar Ali Engineer, Fatimah Mernisi, Amina Wadud, Asma Barlas, and many other Indonesian Muslim feminists since mid-1990s. And I have claimed myself to be a Muslim feminist who believe that God is just, and therefore the message of God in the Quran must support justice. So if there is a promotion to subordinate women by using the Quranic verses, I think what is wrong is not in the Quran, but the way the person interprets the Quran. I think there's similar explanation by you before, that you find many words even from the women claiming that it is based on the Quran, on the Hadith, but actually it is just a belief and patriarchal point of view. I argue for interpretation of the Quran from equal gender perspective. And because I have positioned myself as a Muslim feminist, it is not hard for me to accept the argument presented in your book. Yeah, so I am in similar positionality with you, the author. So, but I don't know about the responses from the readers. Maybe some of the audience here can share how do you think about the book, yeah? Who has different positionality from mine, yeah? On whether it is easy or not easy to accept the author's argument in this book, yeah? Because I understand and realize that sometimes it is not easy to accept new ideas and might take time. And this is based on my experience actually before I learned feminism, because as most of us also that we are brought up in patriarchal culture. And I was also cultured to accept that part of the patriarchal culture on women's subordination. And when I was in my childhood, up until maybe in my first degree, until early 1990s, I didn't know the concept of discrimination yet. So I took for granted many of Islamic teaching I learned. For example, when I was in my primary school, I asked my father about whether in Islam that women receive half of the portion of male portion, and my father say yes, and I was like feeling, well, that's unjust, but well, I was not critical enough. I was not used to use critical thinking. I only learned about critical thinking in 1994, yeah, and I was taking an English course to prepare my departure to take master degree in Australia. And also I was believing that only men who can become a leader. So there was time when I was chosen in the class to be the leader of the class, and I was questioning myself, could women be a leader? And that's how I was brought up in patriarchal culture. And how it was my journey to be at the current state now to be a Muslim feminist. It was began in 1993 when I attended a Rifat Hassan lecture in Jakarta. She was invited by the journal that was famous, Ulumul Quran, yes. Perhaps Professor Komaruddin Hidayat also was there. The seminar was located in LIPI in 1993, where Rifat Hassan stated her argument that in Islam, men and women are equal. So the first time I heard that argument, of course, I rejected her argument because that was contradictory with my belief about Islam. what I received, the teaching that I received from my father is that women should receive half of inheritance, and then in my house also I saw my mother being like subordinate to my father. So I thought that her Islam, Rifat Hasan Islam, was wrong, and my Islam was right, that in Islam men are superior to women. Yeah, but that stuck in my mind actually when I went to Australia to do my master. So I have a question in my head: does Islam subordinate women? And then I started my journey by reading Rifat Hasan argument. So when Rifat Hasan argued that in Islam men and women are equal, I challenged her. I raised my hand to the moderator, and then I was lucky that I was given the first chance to ask the question. And I said to Rifat Hasan that, how could you say in Islam men and women are equal, while the Quran stated that ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala nisa bima fadalallahu ba'dhum 'ala ba'din. I thought that I was right and she is wrong. But then through my intellectual journey when I was in Australia, so I started by reading Rifat Hasan article. So when you read, even you reject the ideas, you come back, you think. Yeah. So I started reading her article. I try to understand it, and then I follow up the references that she used. Yeah, and I was lucky that at that time the library in Murdoch University put one computer with the printer in the one corner that I can search. There was no Google yet, but there was a search engine. I put Rifat Hasan, and then I print one article for me to read, and then I read it at home. And then after reading it, I come back to the library again the next day to look for further readings that is in the references. So I read Rifat Hasan's, and then Aziza Al-Hibri, Aminah Barud books, and then Fatimah Mernisi. So I spent my summer break reading in a cool, nice library at Murdoch University to find the answer that, okay, God is just, and therefore the Quranic verses must support justice. So that's the journey I could finally reach in 1997 when I nearly finished my MA. And then like Rifat Hasan, now I believe that anyone use the Quranic verses to justify injustice against women, what is wrong is not in the Quranic text, but the way they interpret the Quran. Therefore, Muslim feminists argue for the reinterpretation of the Quran from equal gender perspectives. And I write this experience also in a newly published book, Menjadi Muslim Feminist, or in English it is On Being Muslim Feminist. And how I responded to this book, yeah. As you know, that all of you know that the title of the book is No Truth Without Beauty, God, the Quran, and Women's Rights. So this book is a spiritual and intellectual journey of its writer to seek the beauty of God's message when it is read as a whole, comprehensively and contextually. Yeah. As a continuation of the previous publication, I find that the content of the book is similar with the contents of previous publication, especially Rifat Hasan on the creation of human being, and then Aminah Wadud and Asma Barla, such as the emphasis on the importance of positioning the Quran first as the foremost source of scriptural authority in Islam, and being critical to the hadith to the point that even to disregard some hadiths which have been claimed to be valid just because they are in the Sahih Bukhari or Muslim. On this, I like the writing of Fatimah Mernisi also in the in her criticism to the hadith la yufliha qaumun walau amrahum imro'atan. Okay, the next response to the book is that I regard this book echoing the ideas of earlier Muslim feminists I mentioned earlier, which discuss many of the same topics such as human creation, inheritance, women's leadership, polygamy, and also discuss about the age of Aisyah's marriage. And actually, I found discussion on this Aisyah's marriage with many proof, like 8 proofs, to show that actually Aisyah got married with the minimum is 14 years old, or somewhere between 14 years until 21 years old, because our Prophet is not a pedophile, yeah. And then also you discuss in your book about divorce and then hijab. You come back to the original meaning of the hijab is barrier, obstacle, or screen or partitions. And your emphasis on covering the breast and the intimate parts rather than hair and head, yeah. Also, you discuss about the value of female witnesses and the carnal matters such as sex outside marriage, domestic violence, and the preoccupation of some with virgins to emphasize gender equality, which is one of the sustainable development goals. Well, I agree with many of your argument, Lina, that men and women are equal in its creation, that the division of inheritance for boys and girls relates with the expected responsibility of men as the family breadwinner, that women can be a leader, and that the Quran argues for monogamy, which is closer to justice. Yeah. I have also similar feeling about male domination in the mosque, yeah, where women's place is usually small at the back or hidden in the second floor, and uneasy feeling of both men and women in accepting women to be an imam, for example. So, and there are many things also new in this book, such as your emphasis of the inclusive message of the Quran. Yeah, you wrote that it is that many of the Quranic verses has the message of recognition, protection, inclusion, and promotion of women. Yeah, and there has been persistent message of affirmative action, like for example, the female witness in the financial transaction, that women were not used to be involved in economic activities, but it is affirmatively being invited to be the witness. Yeah. And then the interpretation of the Quran on 434 on the word fadribuhunna to mean that it is punishment for those who commit zina. I think this is something new for me, and I agree with you that this is in relation to nuzuz, and I also perceive nuzuz as not being disobedient to husband in relation to marital relationship, like having zina. Yeah, therefore the punishment is doroba. Doroba is in the Quran in relation to zina is azaniyatu wazani fajlidu kulla wahidin minhuma mi'ata jaldah. Yeah, so this is something new for me in your book. And on divorce, Lina emphasized women's right to initiate divorce. This might be due to the difficult process for divorce that you observe, yeah, might be in the Middle East. But in Indonesia, divorce for women is easy, yeah. And actually, the data show that most of the divorce cases in Indonesia are initiated by women, yeah, and the number of divorce initiated by women in most religious code can be 3 times the number of divorce initiated by men. And this was mainly due to economic problems, and there are some of my doctoral students here who are judges. They might add the additional data from your religious codes that indeed most of the divorce are initiated by women. And the case usually that husband can no longer economically support the family, but they still expect respect, obedience, and service, even though they don't contribute anything, even the housework or childcare to the family. So the last about the suggestion for the writer and the readers. So when I read the Quranic verses, I am used to the Arabic. It will be helpful if you could include the original Arabic Quranic verses, yeah, before the English translation. So that will be very helpful, because when I read this and then I read the translation, okay, I want to see the original word. So it will be helpful if the Arabic is there in your book, yeah. And on marriage, it would be good also to add the information on the process of the marriage contract, to criticize the tradition in which women are usually hidden, not being involved in the contract itself. And it is considered Islamic not to see men and women sit side by side. Yeah. For me, a marriage contract should involve women. Yeah, but the reality, I just witnessed marriages recently that it is all like male ceremony. The groom, the wali, yeah, the father's bride, and the witness is all male. Yeah, and usually the bride is hidden, and then after the contract, the bride is being invited to sit side by side. So that's a kind of new tradition that I disagree. Women should be involved in the contract involving their life, the marriage contract. And for the readers, this book needs to be read with open-mindedness, because most of us have been used to use patriarchal point of view in reading the Quran, such as in the case of polygamy represented in the 1974 marriage law, to believe that polygamy is permitted in Islam on condition to be just among the wives. So it is rarely interpreted as explicit instruction to have a monogamous marriage. So most Muslim cite fankihu ma toba lakum minan nisa'i mathna wa thulatha wa ruba'. That's it. Period. They don't continue reading. They do not want to continue reading.
Okay.
Falang tasati'u ang ta'dilu fawahidatan. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Prof.
And let's have discussion.
Nina, for very insightful presentation, and may support or sometimes making proof that what Leena El-Ali have write in her books. And now maybe we have a question from the participants from the chat. Okay, from Rita. Maybe I can, it's too long, the question I just mentioned. As Ms. Leena mentioned just now in your presentation, that why we understand why there is misunderstanding in Quran or even Hadith in the Quran is because of translation. And this is also impact for Rita. There are different way of translation among West or East. So sometimes the difference in applying the message from the Quran. So do you think that different interpretation or not translation can lead to different understanding or different implementation of the implementation of the Quran? Yes. That's the first question.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Professor Nina, for your very thoughtful remarks about my book. I appreciate the level of detail that you went into and the recommendations. I have a few comments that I'll come back to at the end after we have taken some questions from the audience, because I'd like to engage you also on some of the recommendations and talk a little bit more about them. So with regards to Rita's question, it's a very good one. as far as English translations go, I have to mention that pretty much all of them, or most of them, are typically done, the English translations, by Muslims. It's not that, you know, so when the Quran is translated into Western languages, shall we say, don't assume that they're being translated by people from outside of the faith. Actually, they are almost always, not 100%, but typically the popular ones, the widely used ones are actually translated by Muslims. So the problem isn't so much if the person translating is from an Islamic culture or a Western culture. The problem is the mindset of the translator. And the translator typically is either from a patriarchal mindset because of the culture they were born in, or they have adopted the traditional patriarchal interpretations and customs wholesale, and simply kind of carried on, propagated those interpretations. So that's an answer to Rita's question.
Another question. Okay, can I just follow up because I can reach again the question from the audience. Okay, you just mentioned that some hadiths, there is a contradiction between in achieving equality, women equality between men and women. Sometimes Quran stated equal between men and women, but often hadiths go challenge the message from the Quran. So, but sometimes what we have seen in the Quran is it's likely there is a discrimination, but when we see hadiths, this is equality. For example, in the Quran says the female witness should be 2 women and 1 man to be witness, but it seems this is discrimination if we see the textual of Quranic message. But the hadith says that the woman can be primary witness. For example, in the case of a breastfeeding, a rada'ah. So what do you think? As I just see that it seems that not all hadiths, alleged hadiths, sometimes contradictory to Quran. In my understanding, we have to combine, we have to make intersection between understanding the Quran and understanding the hadith. I also agree that sometimes hadiths cover a range of discrimination, even from the Bukhari, as you mentioned in your book. So what do you think about this?
Thank you, Professor Aisyah, for this question. If I may say so, I did not find a single incident in all of the topics that I looked at where the hadith was more favorable regarding women than the Quran. The example that you gave is one of the widely misunderstood ones, if I may say so, from a cultural perspective. And I'm going to read you from the chapter on witnesses, just a little bit to clarify this, if I may. The Quran speaks of giving testimony, and being a witness in the context of 5 specific situations. 5 specific situations, things that came up at the time. These situations or contexts relate to financial transactions, which was mentioned by Professor Nina, I think. That's one. The property of orphans, sexual misconduct by women and men, accusations of infidelity against a married woman, was something God thought was important enough to address, pay attention, and divorce. Okay, so this question of witnesses is discussed 5 times. In only one of these 5 cases does the Quran make a distinction between witnesses on the basis of gender. And this is in the case of financial transactions. Okay. I should also quickly add, in another one of these 5 cases, a woman's testimony is worth more than a man's. There is a case where a woman's testimony is worth more than a man's. But they never tell us about that. They never point out. And that's when a man accuses his wife of infidelity. Her testimony is worth more than his. And we have to think about the morality behind that, the purpose behind that. And in the remaining 3 cases, orphans' property, sexual misconduct by men and women, and divorce, there is no distinction. So what we have to do, and this gives me an opportunity to say something about the methodology of the book, which I didn't address at the beginning. There are 3 or 4 running methodological themes in my book. And pointing out when there are not always problems with translations. There are many, but not in every case. So the translations is one thing to always pay attention to, how something is being translated. We've talked and hinted about another theme, which is to understand the historical context, like here, financial transactions, because women were not used to these things. They didn't engage, as Professor Nina said, in loans and in business, etc. And that verse was actually God telling people, from now on, when you contract a loan, take out a debt, write it down, and let 2 people, be there to witness what is being written down to make sure that it's correct, and so that they can be valid witnesses. So remember, most women at that time didn't even read or write. So how could they be valid witnesses even to what's being written down? So there's the historical context. But another really important methodological theme, and it's probably my most important one, and maybe what is new with my book, is that I argue that when we read a verse, we should read the rest of it, as again, Professor Nina pointed out at one point. But not just read the rest of it, we have to read the verses just before it and the verses just after it. Okay, to get the full context of why is this being discussed and what was going on, yeah? And I go further. I say, after you do that for every topic, we have to look at what else the Quran says about this topic. So for example, with financial transaction, with the question of witnesses, we found 5 different places where the Quran speaks about witnesses. So we have to bring all 5 of them together, each one within its context, within the verses, with the verses just below it and just after it, and put them all together before we make a decision as to what the Quranic stance is with regards to witnesses and gender. Same with, for example, the question of inheritance laws. There are, I think it's 11 inheritance verses. The chapter on inheritance, by the way, was my favorite to write. It was the hardest also, but it was my favorite. There are 11 verses. So we always zoom in on, the daughter only gets half of the son. Unfair. No gender equality in the Quran, we say, or we're told. No, pull out all of the 11 verses, each one again in its context, put them all together, and then you can pass judgment. You can say, this is the Quranic stance on inheritance. And when you do that, of course, you realize, as I show in the chapter on inheritance, that there is gender equality. So I've gone off in a bit of a different direction now. I've even forgotten what the question was. Sorry, but with regards to methodology, yes. So I didn't find a place where the hadith was more favorable to women than the Quran. I always found that they were either the same on an issue or the Quran was more ahead. And actually, I found that most of the problems with regards to women in Islam, in our culture, have come more from hadith than from translations or out of context. I mean, there are issues with translations, yes. There are issues with out of context, yes. There are issues of picking one verse and not all the others about this subject, yes. All of the above. But I found, as I show in the book, that a lot comes from hadith that is incompatible with the Quran. So I would say, Professor Aisyah, that if you take all of the references to a given subject in the Quran, put them all together, and then you compare them with hadith, you will not find that the hadith is more favorable than the Quran. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is also, thank you very much, Ms. Leena. And there is also a question from participants.
Is this the one in English now?
Yeah,
because
the one in
did we
English
do
from
the one in from Ahmad? Yes. I read that one. Yes, so thank you, Amar, for your kind note. Also, your question about, it's like an interdisciplinary question, right? Like, how do we approach all of these things? And I really feel that if we approach our religion from the inside, meaning with our hearts and with our good intentions, in pursuit of understanding, in pursuit of cleansing our soul, lifting our spirit, improving ourselves from within, if we approach every question that way, then we will naturally arrive at better and better and better conclusions and solutions for the problems that we face today. And what I mean by that is, let us not start from the premise of, with all due respect, I am an environmentalist, I am a feminist, I am a human rights activist, I am a women's rights and gender equality professional. I am these are all labels that I find serve to restrict us, because, or from a race perspective, I see some of the examples here: race, class, sexuality, ecology, very valid. I'm not saying not valid, but I think we have to come at it from within, from the heart, from a pure intention in pursuit of truth and guidance and constructive problem solving. And as we do so, we will encounter the racial issues, the environmental issues, the sexual issues, etc. And then we bring them in. We try to integrate them along the way. So I'm not giving you an easy answer. I'm saying that it's a journey. And I would simply recommend that the point of departure never be a given discipline. The point of departure always has to be, because this is religion, this is spirituality. We want to put the spirituality back into the religion. We want to start from the good intentions in pursuit of constructive solutions. And along the way, we will integrate these things. For example, you encounter racial inequity. Well, your religion can inform you with regards to racial equity. You bring it in, and so on. It's not the easiest of questions, and so it's not the easiest of answers either, but it's the one I can offer today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Leena. Prof. Leena, this one for you.
Okay, I will start with the easiest way first about from Sultan about what do you mean by divorce in Indonesia, two-thirds initiated by women? Yes, in Indonesia there are two kinds of divorce. The first one initiated by women, we call it cerai gugat or hulu, and then the second one is cerai talak. Yeah, that's initiated by male. And because I studied and did research about polygamy, so I asked the data from the religious codes to find the cases of divorce in the annual report. So I can see from time to time the number of divorce cases initiated by women is like two to three times with the cases of from the cases of divorce initiated by men. Yeah, I would like to talk in Indonesian also because I saw some of my students, doctoral students who is judged in religious courts. For example, Pak Ahmad Zakiuddin bisa menambahkan data dan menguatkan apa yang saya sampaikan bahwa kasus perceraian ataupun hakim yang lain yang ada di sini, bahwa kasus perceraian di pengadilan agama itu jumlahnya itu kalau yang cerai gugat itu bisa 2 sampai 3 kali lipat dari kasus cerai pendaftaran yang disampaikan oleh laki-laki. Mungkin silakan sebentar siapapun yang hakim yang ada di sini. Atau hanya hanya namanya saja.
Saya tambahin tapi pakai bahasa.
Oh, Pak Happy, silakan, silakan.
Indonesia.
Ya, nggak apa-apa, ya, silakan.
Nanti ditranslatekan. Jadi memang di Pengadilan Agama Muko-Muko sendiri sebagai contoh ya, itu 90% lebih itu yang mengajukan adalah perkara perceraian gugat. Jadi pihak wanita yang mengajukan perkara ke Pengadilan Agama. Nah, selebihnya sekitar 8% itu baru cerai talak, atau istilahnya itu pihak laki-laki yang mengajukan. Jadi secara nasional memang cerai gugat lebih banyak itu pihak perempuan yang mengajukan. Nah, contohnya di Muko-Muko sendiri begitu. Itu kenyataannya. Ya, kenapa? Karena fenomena yang menarik di Indonesia lebih banyak perempuan. 85% lebih, bahkan 90% itu yang mengajukan pihak perempuan ketimbang laki-laki. Begitu, Prof.
Terima kasih Pak Happy. Let me translate it for Lina. Happy Pian is one of my students, my doctoral students at the State Islamic University, and he is one of the judges who works in the religious court, judging everyday cases in the religious court, and he just reported that 85 until 95% of divorce cases are initiated by women. And usually the judges are being friendly to women. So that's interesting finding in Indonesia. Okay, I will move on to another questions from Fadlian Fa. The question is that it is in Indonesian language, let me read it. Faktor apakah yang menyebabkan kalangan barat banyak fobia terhadap Islam, padahal hakikat ajaran Islam adalah menebar ajaran rahmatan lil alamin. Yes, that's what we believe, and that's what the ideal Islam is. That Islam is rahmatan lil alamin, it is arguing for justice. But why there is Islamophobia? Ya, apakah ini karena faktor politik yang tidak ingin melihat ajaran Islam dapat menjadi peradaban alternatif yang berpengaruh dunia, sehingga dikesankan Islam sebagai ajaran yang mendukung kekerasan hanya karena sebagian perilaku kelompok Islam tertentu melakukan tindakan radikal atau terorisme. Ya, ini dari Fadli Andi Natsir dari UIN Alauddin Makassar, ini temannya Kak Ica ya, Prof. Siti Aisyah. Nah, ini saya relate dengan pertanyaan yang barusan itu, saya relate dengan pertanyaan dari seseorang dari Afghanistan, namanya itu Mansur Hasan Zada. Assalamualaikum ma'am, I'm from Afghanistan. It is really nice discussion, but in Afghanistan the women have no rights. So they are really disappointed about their future. It has been a year girls are forbidden to go to school, and also we have underage marriage. Ya, begitu. Di antaranya pendekatan Barat itu adalah pendekatan empirik. Mereka melihat fenomena yang ada, ya, melihat fenomena yang ada. Jadi misalnya di banyak Muslim majority countries gitu ya, para perempuan itu apa namanya, yaitu dinikahkan muda, misalnya di Yaman. Masa saya melihat foto anak-anak kecil ya di bawah 8 tahun itu line up dipegang gitu ya oleh pengantin yang itu mungkin usianya 24 tahun ke atas. Itu juga ada kaitannya dengan buku Lina di sini, di mana orang tuh seperti preoccupied dengan virgin ya, dengan perawan. Saking inginnya perawan, mereka ambil dari sejak usia anak-anak gitu ya, dan itu mengerikan sekali, dan itu terjadi di banyak negara Muslim gitu ya, dan mereka menamakan itu sebagai misalnya mengikuti tradisi Nabi yang menikahi Aisyah, padahal di diskursus ataupun wacana terbaru tentang Siti Aisyah yang selama ini didominasi bahwa Nabi itu menikah ketika Aisyah 6 tahun, kemudian berpupur 9 tahun, tapi ternyata saya mendapatkan hasil penelitian terbaru dengan minimal dapat pembuktian itu bahwa Aisyah itu menikah dengan Nabi itu minimal usianya 14 tahun atau antara 14 tahun sampai 21 tahun. Seperti yang sudah saya ungkapkan bahwa Nabi itu bukan pedofil gitu. Jadi tidak perlu mencari justifikasi perkawinan anak dengan apa yang dilakukan oleh Rasul gitu ya, hanya karena bergantung kepada sebuah hadis yang itu sumbernya adalah satu orang dan itu diriwayatkan ketika Hisham sudah tua dan tidak bisa dipercaya, dan itu adalah hadis ahad gitu. Sayangnya itu masuk ke dalam salah satu buku sahih gitu ya. Jadi realitanya seperti itu, dan saya sendiri kan saya mengajar gender dalam Islam itu banyak atau tidak sedikit dari mahasiswa saya merasa misalnya, oh belajar gender itu adalah untuk ngacak-ngacak tradisi Islam, padahal gender itu adalah mengajak critical thinking terhadap tradisi yang ada yang kadang-kadang dibangun berdasarkan pemahaman yang patriarkis gitu ya. Dan tadi ada pertanyaan juga dari salah satu mahasiswa saya juga, ini adalah seorang hakim ya, mana ya sebentar, saya kok apa namanya lupa namanya ya, dia siapa namanya, Bu Suryaman itu ya, siapa namanya nama depannya, ini siapa. Oke, saya fokus ke ini Prahasti Suyaman ya. Kalau misalnya kok interpretasi Islam itu banyak patriarkal, kapan sih apa namanya patriarchal interpretation itu image gitu ya. Jadi budaya patriarki itu sudah sangat tua ya. Mungkin dari sejak budaya ini ada ya, sejak setelah berburu dan meramu gitu ya, itu dimulai budaya patriarki, dan itu berpengaruh kepada cara memahami ajaran Islam, dan it's only like recently that like beginning 1970s when we find the term gender, that we use critical thinking between what is the nature or the kodrat and what is constructed by society, or what is being created by God, which is not changeable, like that I am born as a female. No, society cannot change me right away to be male, but on the roles, it is constructed by the society. Because it is constructed by the society and not created by God, so we can change it. Maybe that's for me first. If there is more questions, maybe we can invite a question orally. Maybe.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Nina. Saya bisa menambahkan sedikit apa yang disampaikan Prof. Nina. Sorry, Lena, we use Indonesian for respond little bit.
No problem at all.
Tentang tentang about child marriage.
Yes.
Tentang perkawinan anak, hadis perkawinan anak yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Nina, sebenarnya hadis itu sudah ditolak dalam konteks tidak sahih karena ada dua persoalan. Persoalan yang pertama tentang ada sanad hadis yang tidak so valid ya, terkait dengan kethikohannya tidak baik. Itu persoalan itu yang satu ya, periwayat, ada periwayat yang tidak bagus, istilahnya tidak doif istilahnya kalau dalam hadis. Terus yang kedua, persoalan matan hadis itu secara historis itu apa yang disampaikan Prof. Nina itu bertentangan dengan data historis bahwa hampir semua anaknya Abu Bakar itu hijrah ke Madinah kita umur 10 tahun, padahal beda umur Aisyah dengan Asma itu 5 tahun. Jadi begitu, sehingga kesimpulannya dia kawin dengan Nabi ketika umur sekitar 14 sampai 15 tahun. Saya kira itu tambahan dari saya yang terkait dengan untuk penguatan apa yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Nina. One more question for you, Ms. Leena, about how Islam put LGBTQ rights. There's a question about that.
Yes. Obviously, this is a modern issue for the most part. So it's not something that is directly addressed, but we can be informed, obviously, by what the Quran has to say about that. So the only reference relates to Lut, the prophet Lot, and Nabi Lut, yeah. Right? With regards to his people at the time. The references relate to what was very much a sort of public debauchery context, very much a question of not sort of individual inclination. The context at the time was very much in terms of a, you know, like you get a trend and a fashion and when something becomes in vogue for a while. So it was an egregious situation that was very much in line with what we would call licentiousness or public debauchery, which is very similar, in fact, to what was happening at the time in the Prophet's day. With regards to, we don't hear a lot about this now, but it's there in many of the texts and in the scholars' works. It's shocking to us, but there were even public orgies, which sounds, you know, just incredibly hard to believe. So in those contexts, of course, you know, the scriptural stance is a firm one. It's a very strict one in those contexts, but that's all we know. We know that was the context with regards to, and that's why, you know, the question of 4 witnesses in the case of extramarital, 4 witnesses, because they used to be actually public engagements of this kind that it was shocking for me to discover used to happen in those days in 7th century Arabia. And it's the same in the context of the Prophet Lot and that story in terms of the condemnation of that kind of widespread homosexual behavior. And this is my understanding from what I have read. The broader LGBTQ issue is one where human agency now comes in, right? Because science is teaching us new things every day about what some people are born with, and as opposed to, say, what some people may choose to do with their bodies and with their lives. And this is where human agency comes in. But this is also, I would say, where free will comes in, and the conversation about free will would be essential to anything we try to do as human agents to address the issue of LGBTQ. I believe the question of free will that the Quran gives to everybody and enshrines should be a part of it, which will then relate to the question of, regardless of what each one of us might think, who really is the ultimate judge with regards to these things. You know, there's a story I always think of when people ask me a question like this. The prophet Dawood, as many of you probably know, he fell in love with a married woman, and he fell for her badly, to the point that he actually, being the king and the commander, he sent him off, the husband, to the most dangerous part of the war at the time, whatever that was, hoping he would get killed. And he did get killed, so that the woman would be free and he could marry her. And of course, this is a terrible thing for any man to do. And it's a shocking thing to hear that a prophet did this, right? But then God tells us, but God looked into his heart and he knows what you know not. And he is the ultimate judge. So, we should always remind ourselves of that, be humble enough to say, well, we might have strong opinions about certain things, but if God can look into the heart of somebody who sends off a woman's husband to be killed so that he can have her for himself, and he finds something redeeming, then surely, who are we to pass judgment on lesser acts and or even equal acts, egregious acts.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leena, for a very inspiring response, also from Prof. Nina. Thank you. A lot of response for the comments, and this is 21:29, yeah. Maybe 5 minutes more. Before I make a concluding remark about this meeting, we invite Prof. Komaruddin. Are you with us to give a comment?
Well, okay, I really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah.
Very much. We have 3 women that very having bright mind and wisdom. Really, I'm very grateful tonight. Well, of course, I can agree more, because for me that I hold the ideas that men and women are basically same, equal. So the relationship between husband and wife should be between subject to subject, not subject to object. So far, what I see, I think that man as a subject, full subject, and woman just like an object. But it should be subject plus subject together, equal. Allow me to share shortly in bahasa. Udah sekalian, kita bangga ya bahwa sekarang ini di Indonesia banyak kajian-kajian tentang kesetaraan laki perempuan, gender, yang dilakukan secara bertanggung jawab dan ilmiah. Banyak perempuan-perempuan yang melakukan kajian yang mereka dengan latar belakang santri yang baik, dari keluarga yang soleh, dan mereka dengan jujur, tidak provokatif, tapi menyajikan data dan siap berargumentasi. Seperti misalnya kita lihat malam ini ada Prof. Nina, Prof. Aisyah, dan yang lain-lain. Saya rasa ini satu hal yang unik, merupakan salah satu kelebihan wacana keislaman di Indonesia yang Anda tidak akan menemukan di dunia di Timur Tengah. Seperti tadi dikatakan bahwa angka cerai yang mengusulkan hampir 90% itu wanita dari pihak istri. Dan ini bagi kita mungkin dengarnya biasa saja. Pagi ini tidak terjadi di Timur Tengah. Di Arab itu ketika pandemi itu banyak terjadi krisis rumah tangga. Salah satunya ketika musim pandemi, mestinya suami di rumah, tapi tidak izin pergi. Rupanya dia terpaksa dan mesti untuk apel pada istrinya yang kedua dan ketiga, dan akhirnya istrinya tahu, dan timbul sehingga banyak terjadi perceraian gitu, ketika pandemi ini. Karena tadinya dia kawin lagi dan mereka kawin kan tidak harus sepengetahuan istri, karena istri itu subordinate. Tapi ketika pandemi ini terjadi, jadi sekarang ini sudah semakin terjadi keterbukaan. Dan terakhir saya yakin ya bahwa tadi dikatakan we have to distinguish, differentiate between Quran and Islam. Islam is the production of religious over time, because it is a lot of interpretation mixed up in those Islamic thought. Nah, oleh karena itu kalau kita bicara Islam, yaitu hal yang dinamis, yang terbuka, yang tidak absolut, absolutely relative and relatively absolute. Dengan demikian kita harus humble, rendah hati. Dan malam hari ini sekali lagi saya senang sekali bahwa di Indonesia banyak perempuan-perempuan yang semakin tercerahkan, dan teman laki-laki itu harus rendah hati untuk mendengarkan, karena kadang kita juga dipengaruhi kacamata warisan dari tradisi kita yang menganggap bahwa wanita itu separuh jadi saksi. Bagaimana kalau wanita itu latihan intelijen, educated, latihan canggih dengan teknologi, sementara yang laki-laki itu bodoh? Masuk anak-anak laki-laki nilainya 1, perempuan separuh, padahal lebih educated, lebih pinter. Nah ini kan nggak rasional. Masa Islam seperti itu ajarannya? Nah gini-gini hemat saya penting. Dan itu dicerahkan dengan cara tidak usah emosional, tapi dengan datar aja. Terima kasih. Thank you, Lina. Again, one more again, thank you, Lina, Prof. Nina, dan Aisyah. Terima kasih.
Makasih banyak, Prof. Komar. Thank you for the comment and you're respectful for women in entire world, especially from Indonesia. Prof. Nina and Ms. Elena, thank you for your dynamic and fruitful discussion for this topic. And I want to conclude by using bahasa, so we can have some discussion next time. Bapak Ibu sekalian, sekali lagi terima kasih kami sampaikan terutama kepada leader kita, host yang luar biasa, Prof. Komaruddin Hidayat, dan juga Caknurian Group. Dan saya akan memberikan beberapa catatan dalam diskusi kita dalam bahasa Indonesia. Yang pertama, bahwa Al-Quran itu poin penting adalah ada kesetaraan antara laki dan perempuan. Kita ternyata menurut Prof. Lina dan Prof. Nina adalah kita kurang memahami atau kurang secara komprehensif memahami dari apa yang disampaikan oleh Al-Quran. Jadi menurut Ibu Lina dan Prof. Nina bahwa dalam memahami Al-Quran terutama, nanti ada catatan sendiri saya tentang hadis. Dalam memahami Al-Quran, beliau start dari spirituality. Jadi hati, dari spirituality, dari hati, untuk merubah mindset pemahaman yang sudah mendarah daging tentang relasi antara laki dan perempuan, terutama dalam kaitan dengan change ke relasi sosial, terutama relasi antara laki dan perempuan. Jadi beliau memulai dari spirituality dan bagaimana hati itu mampu memahami atau menyingkap, istilah beliau adalah zoom out, menyingkap apa yang misteri dalam Al-Quran. Dan salah satu catatan metodologi yang beliau lakukan adalah beliau membaca seluruh ayat atau mengumpulkan, mengidentifikasi seluruh ayat yang terkait misalnya tentang kesaksian tadi, kesaksian perempuan. Jadi dia mengumpulkan, mengidentifikasi seluruh ayat yang terkait dan mencoba memahami kata per kata tentu dengan bahasa langsung dari bahasa Arab atau bahasa Al-Quran. Setelah itu beliau menggunakan apa yang istilah kita munasabah ayat. Jadi beliau mengaitkan ayat sebelumnya dan ayat yang terkait dengan ayat yang akan dikaji tentang tema tertentu. Setelah itu baru membuat konklusi sebenarnya apa posisi Al-Quran. Jadi tidak secara parsial memahami Al-Quran. Nah ini sangat luar biasa. Cuman mungkin nanti catatan kita adalah kelihatannya Prof. Ibu Lina tadi masih menganggap banyak hadis-hadis memang yang diduga bias gender, yang mendiskreditkan perempuan. Sekalipun dalam catatan kita sebenarnya kalau kajian hadis itu kita tidak bisa memahami ansih begitu saja, tapi perlu ada juga membandingkan atau intertekskan atau secara kontekstual, dan ini mungkin akan ada kajian tersendiri tentang bagaimana aspeknya hadis. Kita juga tidak bisa menjustifikasi sekalipun hadis-hadis yang bernuansa misoginis tadi ada tertuang di dalam beberapa kitab Bukhari yang konon menjadi peringkat pertama di dalam peringkat kategorisasi peringkat atau kitab hadis. Itu yang kedua. Yang ketiga, yang jelas kita secara personal dan juga secara kelembagaan, secara kolektif, kita akan mencoba memastikan bahwa memang Al-Quran tidak diskriminasi terhadap perempuan, equal antara relasi antara laki dan perempuan. Kalau ada terjadi diskriminasi, berarti pemahaman kita terhadap Al-Quran menurut dia belum komprehensif. Saya kira itu catatan kami pada konteks diskusi kita pada hari ini. Once again, thank you Ms. Leena El-Ali for your fruitful discussion, and then maybe one time we can invite you for the next discussion in my hometown, because I am from South Sulawesi. About 2 hours flight from Jakarta, where Prof Nina, Prof Kamal are there staying. And terima kasih juga Pak Ibu Prof Nina Nurmila. Ini adik tapi lebih hebat dari saya. Luar biasa, thank you so much. Dan terima kasih Bapak Ibu sekalian yang sudah hadir. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan terima kasih pada Prof Komar dan di seluruh timnya. Mari kita tutup diskusi buku kita pada malam hari ini dengan sama-sama membaca Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. Ya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.